Peace. What's happening, everyone? What I deal with?
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out you want hygiene a tweet. That's why enough of them get rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a jeep. Every day a mother ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 days we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go live. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the sake. Now cater about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest said them want it low. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. This a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah.
Hey, blessings. Thanks for joining me. Remember to hit the like button. Remember to subscribe. But let's get right into it. Today I want to talk about Ibrahim Traore, who has been everywhere on social media. You can't turn on anything social media without hearing about Ibrahim Traore. So I am just, a little bit interested on kind of who he is, what's going on in Burkina Faso, and why it's so important for Black people that we support him. And that's the piece that really interests me, is why are Black people everywhere, Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in Europe, in America, they want us to have marches supporting Ibrahim Traore and what's going on in Burkina Faso. And so, that kind of sparked my interest just into learning a little bit more about what's going on there and whether or not it's really worth supporting. So I just did a little bit of small ChatGPT research, if that's even considered research. And I just asked, what is the economic and political system in Burkina Faso? That's one of the first things that I thought about, is just exactly what type of system is there that we're being asked to support. Because I think that's really important. We're being asked to support him because he's Black. It's a Black nation, and because we're Black, and that's pretty much the gist of why we should support him. And for me, that has never been enough of a gist. And so I just want to learn a little bit more before I choose to say yay or nay with my support. But here's what ChatGPT says concerning the economic and political system in Burkina Faso. It says the political system, the type is a transitional military government as of 2025. A military government. Right off the bat, I'm not sure I want to support military governments. But let's continue reading. It says the leader is Captain Ibrahim Traore, the interim president since the 2022 coup. So he came to power through a coup d'etat, which means the military just took over the government. The status of the political system is that there's no active parliament, and it's governed by military decrees under a transitional charter. So it doesn't sound very democratic, this military government. It doesn't sound, well, military governments are never really democratic, and military governments normally take over a democratic government, or a government that was voted in. The transition timeline. So they're operating under a transitional charter, and the transition timeline, the military government has proposed a transition to civilian rule by July 2024, but it has been delayed and the timeline remains uncertain. So they should have transitioned back to civilian rule, which is, voting and a democratic process of voting to see who's going to be your leader. And that should have happened back in July of 2024, July of last year. But that was delayed for whatever reason. And the timeline, it says, remains uncertain. And so, we're being asked to support someone who took over through a coup, who's a military leader, who, visibly walks around with a gun on his hip, and in military gear, and someone who hasn't, I guess, shown any interest so far in returning to civilian rule. And so for those reasons, I'm a little bit skeptical as to why we're being asked to support this type of a system. The judicial system is based on French civil law with a constitutional council and Supreme Court. The governance style is centralized, authoritarian under current military rule. So it's a centralized authoritarian rule that's going on in Burkina Faso today under Ibrahim Traore, and black people everywhere who live under democratic rule are being asked to support this person, are being asked to go out and march for this person, are being asked to protect this authoritarian leader who doesn't appear to have any desire to go back to civilian rule. The economic system, let's just talk about the economic system real quick. It says it's a mixed economy with heavy dependence on agriculture, mainly subsistence farming, gold mining. Top export and major source of state revenue is gold. In foreign aid, though some Western aid has been cut due to the coups, so I guess that kind of explains the problems that they're having with the West. I guess the West wants them to go back to civilian rule, and Ibrahim Traore must appear to not want to do that for whatever his reasons are. And I'm going to assume that, the explanation is that when they are under civilian rule, that the West controls those puppet governments. I guess this would be their argument, is that the West controls those puppet governments and nothing really gets done for the people of Burkina Faso under civilian rule, because there's just too much influence being pushed by the French and other Western countries. The key exports again are gold, cotton, and livestock. The currency is the West African CFA franc, which is linked to the euro and managed by the Central Bank of West African states. Recent trends expanding in foreign partnerships, especially with Russia, example Nordgold. And that's interesting because a part of the reason that we're being asked to march and support Burkina Faso is to get rid of the Western influence that's in Burkina Faso and in other African states. They want to get away from the Western control of their economies. But it sounds to me that they're going right into the hands of Russia. And I'm not sure what the difference is between the Russian influence and what they call the Western influence that they're trying to avoid. But maybe we'll see some differences as we read. Shift in alliances, moving away from the Western economic partners and aligning more with Russia and other non-Western actors. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe some of those other non-Western actors are China, it does say it's a mixed economy. Um, Traore, Ibrahim Traore does remind me of um, those Malemba and the people in South Africa, the economic freedom fighters that wear the same type of gear, their army gear with their red berets. And the economic freedom fighters are a communist group. And I'm wondering if Burkina Faso or if Ibrahim Traore himself has those communist leanings, given that he's tying himself to Russia and even China. Are those communist leanings part of the reason why he's making those partnerships? Other trends: security spending. Security spending, it says, is high due to ongoing conflict with Islamist insurgents, diverting resources from development. So I think another part of the reason why they're moving away from the West, or part of their argument, is that the West France in particular, does a weak job in protecting them from those Islamist terrorists. And I guess they feel that they can do a better job of protecting themselves. And so, but are they really protecting themselves? They're not necessarily moving away from being protected. They're just, instead of being protected by the French, they're now moving towards Russia and apparently China as well. The next question I'm going to ask ChatGPT is, why does France oppose Traore? And it says France opposes Ibrahim Traore primarily because his leadership challenges French influence in West Africa, particularly in Burkina Faso. Here are the key reasons. 1. Expulsion of French military forces. After taking power in 2022, Traore terminated military agreements with France and expelled French troops and diplomats. Burkina Faso had previously relied on France for counterterrorism assistance against jihadist insurgents, but Traore viewed their presence as ineffective and a symbol of neocolonialism. So they found that their fight against Islamic insurgents was ineffective, meaning the French and the support they were getting from France they felt was ineffective, and that France was a symbol of neocolonialism. Those colonial powers that are really just there to rob them of their resources and not really give them the support that they need, whether it be economic or military or political. And so that's part of the reason why Burkina Faso is moving away from France. But why doesn't Russia seen as neocolonialists? I guess Russia was never a colonial power, I guess. Russia never owned any colonies in Africa, I'm guessing, and that's a question. If anyone knows the answer to these, maybe you can comment in the chat. I'd love for you to leave a comment about what you feel about all of this. But yeah, that would be my guess, is that Western countries, Russia is more in the north than in the west. So the West is where the colonial powers really existed throughout the ages, and so they're trying to move away from that type of influence. The next reason that France opposes Traore is because of the rejection of French political influence. Traore has embraced a pan-African anti-colonial ideology and openly criticizes France's historical and current role in Africa. So they're embracing pan-Africanism, which again means just unity of all African states and being self-sufficient, and moving away from colonial ideology and just colonial control, if you will. It says Traoré aligns rhetorically and politically with Mali and Niger, two other military-led states that also ousted France, forming the alliance of Sahel states, which openly resists French influence. So Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are really the three states that have been in the news, particularly Burkina Faso and Traoré, though. I think Traoré has survived a few death attempts at his life, and so for that reason he's been on social media more. He's a young guy, a young leader that people look up to, and so for those reasons he's kind of taken the prominent role out of those three countries that are in the Sahel states. And I'm wondering also if Russia is behind the scenes influencing this move away from France and away from the West, if Russia and China and their quest of having more control in Africa, if they're not in the background somewhere fueling this anti-Western, anti-neocolonialist movement that's going on in Africa. The third reason that France opposes Traoré is because of his alignment with Russia. It says France views Traoré's deepening military and economic ties with Russia, and possibly Wagner operatives. I'm not sure what Wagner operatives are. I may have to look into that, as a geopolitical threat. This shift weakens France's strategic and economic foothold in the Sahel region. Sure, so they oppose him because he wants to replace them with Russia, and they have a lot of economic interest, and strategic interest, maybe military strategic influence in West Africa, and they see what France is doing, what Russia is doing rather, as a threat to what they aspire to do. The fourth reason France opposes Traoré is because of their concern over democracy and human rights. France and the EU, the European Union, opposed Traoré's military-led government for suspending democratic processes, restricting civil liberties, and delaying the return to civilian rule. And those are some of the issues I have as well with what's going on there. Is why have democratic processes been suspended for so long in Burkina Faso, and what is the delay of getting back to civilian rule? It says the French fear that this sets a precedent for anti-democratic military coups gaining legitimacy in Francophone Africa. So they're concerned about the number of coups that have taken place in West Africa, and I think they have an interest in making sure that doesn't continue to happen, because again, those coups seem to always be supported by Russia, and are mainly in the interests of Russia and other non-Western countries. Another reason is strategic resource competition. French companies had interests in Burkina Faso's mining and energy sectors. Traoré's turn toward Russia and state-controlled policies threatens those investments. So French companies, have their interests in mining and energy. And again, that's another part of the reason why we're being asked outside of Burkina Faso to support what's happening with Traoré, is because this is just another example of the white man trying to go in there and control the resources of an African country, and they want the white man to leave us alone. and leave this African leader alone that they feel is working to best support what's happening in Burkina Faso. And so, those are kind of the issues that I'm concerned about. And as well as, the idea is that people in the diaspora, people in America, in Europe, in the Caribbean, everywhere should support Traoré because he's a Pan-Africanist. But there are other countries in Africa, particularly countries that are members of ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of Western African States. There are other ECOWAS countries who oppose Traoré and who themselves are Pan-Africanist states who belong to the Pan-African Union. But they have an issue with what's going on, but they don't support Traoré. And I think it's mainly because he got into power through a coup. And these ECOWAS states also believe that they should go back to civilian rule. And so, but as it's being presented to people in the diaspora, one of the reasons we're being given to support him is because he's a Pan-African. But it seems to be a lot deeper than that, because there are other Pan-African states that oppose him. And that's the next thing I wanted to really kind of get a grasp of and see what ChatGPT could offer as a reason. And so the next question I'm asking is, are Pan-African states a part of ECOWAS? And it says, yes, many Pan-African states are members of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of Western African States, but tensions have grown between ECOWAS and some of its Pan-Africanist military-led members. Here's how it breaks down. Current ECOWAS members relevant to Pan-Africanism. Countries with strong Pan-Africanist movements or rhetoric that are ECOWAS members include Burkina Faso, who's suspended, Mali suspended, Niger suspended, Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria. So Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria are themselves Pan-Africanist states that are a part of ECOWAS. And I think Burkina Faso is trying to distance itself from ECOWAS, because ECOWAS, as they see it, is under Western control, and their main interests are Western interests. And so the Sahel states, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, have distanced themselves and are more aligning with Russia and even China to get away from that control. So they are suspended from ECOWAS. So now, the question would be, how does that affect the Pan-Africanist movement in general? How does this split affect Pan-Africanism? And which side of Pan-Africanism are we being asked to support? Which side of Pan-Africanism do we support? Do people in the West, like Americans and people in the Caribbean, are we more prone to support? Is it more in our interest to support a Russia and China controlled West Africa, or a Western control of South Africa, of West Africa? What's in the best interests of Africans in the diaspora who are mainly living in the West? Why is it more in our interest to have West Africa controlled not by the West? And why should we support that? The key points in terms of ECOWAS and Burkina Faso. There are suspensions due to military coups Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were suspended from ECOWAS after military takeovers. So all of them were involved in military takeovers. That's something. And they've all come together under one banner. And again, somehow I believe that Russia and China are behind this, supporting this push as well. It says these states have accused ECOWAS of being aligned with Western interests, especially France and the US, and have rejected ECOWAS demands to return quickly to civilian rule. So they don't want to go back to civilian rule because of Western control. And I guess the West, that's one of the West's demands in Africa, is that they have civilian rule, some type of democratic rule. And these guys are not necessarily in favor of that. And, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily because they are opposed to democratic rule, or if they just feel that the democratic rule that ends up is just a puppet of the West, and that the West just kind of, puts these people in power. And so that's why they prefer a military rule. But that's the question that I would ask. The next key point is that the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States. In response to ECOWAS pressure, these countries formed the Alliance of Sahel States in 2023, which emphasizes sovereignty, mutual defense, and Pan-African solidarity. In January 2024, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger announced their intention to withdraw from ECOWAS entirely, so they intend on withdrawing. And again, what does that say, or what does that do for Pan-African solidarity? I think that it's interesting that it's Pan-Africans or Pan-Africanists in the West. It's Pan-Africanists in the West that are really pushing for us to support Burkina Faso in the name of Pan-Africanist or Pan-Africanism. But there are Pan-Africanist states in Africa that oppose that. So where do we stand in the West? And what's in our interest? The next thing is Pan-Africanism versus ECOWAS. Pan-Africanism in this context is often anti-neocolonial, critical of global financial structures, and supportive of military-led governance, which contrasts with ECOWAS's pro-democracy charter. ECOWAS is seen by some Pan-Africanists as too close to France, the EU, and the IMF. So that's pretty much, I guess, one of the main drivers for why they want to leave ECOWAS is because they are critical of global financial structures. ECOWAS is too close to France, the EU, and the IMF, who I think they think are giving them unfair loans and things of that nature. So in summary, ChatGPT says, while many Pan-African states are technically in ECOWAS, those with the most radical Pan-Africanist agendas, especially under military regimes, are suspended or exiting due to philosophical and political clashes over sovereignty, democracy, and foreign influence. So again, what are people in the African diaspora who live in the West, who have lived in the West all their lives, what form of Pan-Africanism is in their interest? Is it a Pan-Africanism that's influenced by Western countries, or rather a Pan-Africanism that is supported or allied to Western powers, or a Pan-Africanism that's allied to non-Western, Asian, Russian powers? Which branch of Pan-Africanism best supports what Africans in the West are interested in their interest. Which form of Pan-Africanism do they feel should they really be supporting? And that's for them to decide. I've never considered myself a Pan-Africanist, but as someone who lives in the West, I guess my guess would be that just given what is said here in terms of support for democracy and being against authoritarian military rule, for those reasons alone, I would tie myself more to the ECOWAS states, simply because they're more promoting civilian rule. Maybe there's stuff I don't know about this civilian rule. Is it really civilian rule, or again, are they just governments that are propped up by the West? Maybe that's the view of others that support what Russia is doing. Or maybe we'll get into it as we continue. But again, if you know more than I do, you can leave a comment and inform me of what I am uninformed about. The next question I'm going to ask, they said, according to Traore, and his position is that a part of the reason that they're moving away from France is because of just how weak they are in protecting Burkina Faso from these Islamist insurgents. And so the next question I ask is there a lot of terrorism in ECOWAS countries? I know that in Burkina Faso, there's if Traore, most of his time is spent fighting against jihadists. And so I wanted to know if it actually is true that those ECOWAS states are just not being protected from Islamists by their Western allies. So the next question is there a lot of terrorism in ECOWAS countries? And it says, yes, terrorism is a significant issue in several ECOWAS countries, particularly in the Sahel region. The problem is concentrated in a few key areas. Sahel region is the most affected. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger face relentless attacks from jihadist groups such as ISIS in the Greater Sahara, ISGS, Jama'at Nasser al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, and Al-Qaeda affiliate. These attacks target civilians, military, and aid workers, causing thousands of deaths and displacements. The instability was a key reason behind the military coups in these countries. And it sounds as if the insurgencies, the Islamic insurgencies, are concentrated in the Sahel region. And I guess it makes sense that they would be firsthand to how weak France and the West are in protecting them from these jihadists. It does also mention Nigeria. It says Nigeria faces major insurgency from Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa Province, ISWAP. The violence is concentrated in the northeast, but also affects the northwest and central regions, contributing to mass displacement and insecurity. So Nigeria is also affected. Other ECOWAS countries, lower but a rising threat. So the threat of jihadists is not as great, but it is rising. In Benin and Togo, experiencing spillover of Sahelian jihadist violence into northern border areas. Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, faced jihadist attacks in 2020 to 2021 near the Burkina Faso border. In Ghana and Senegal, not yet affected by active terrorism, but are investing in counterterrorism and border security due to proximity to hotspots. So some of these other ECOWAS countries have those difficulties as well, but to a smaller degree. And I guess I'm wondering why that is. Is it because of their greater investment in in counterterrorism and security. And why is that not enough in those Sahel states? Why is it not enough to have more investment in counterterrorism? Why is a military coup the answer? But let's continue to read. Why it persists. Why does Islamic insurgencies persist in those states? It says there's a weak state presence in rural zones. So there's just not enough of a military government presence in those rural zones. Poverty and youth unemployment. So I guess a lot of the young people turn to Islam and become jihadists themselves in protest of the poverty that they face. Porous borders and limited coordination between states. And finally, distrust of foreign intervention, especially French-led missions. So yeah, those would be reasons that would influence or increase the presence of jihadist groups who take advantage of just those types of things. So it says terrorism is a major issue in ECOWAS, especially in the Central Sahel and Nigeria, with spillover risks to coastal West Africa. So, again, my question would be, why is counterterrorism not sufficient? Why is it sufficient in other states, but not in some? Why is it not, possible to just, have more of a government presence in those rural zones? Why is it takeover of the government the answer? Takeover of the government and kicking out the allies that you've had. But again, maybe y'all know better than I do. The last issue I want to talk about, though, is, the talk is that they're trying to get away from Western control. And literally, what that kind of translates to in a lot of people's minds, a lot of black people's minds, especially in the diaspora, is that they're trying to get away from the white man and that they're trying to be independent of white control. They're tired of the white man controlling their resources, and they want to have control of their resources. And Ibrahim Traoré is celebrated because that's what he represents. He represents an independent African state that has kicked out the white man and is controlling the resources. And, and for those reasons, we should support him, because he represents what we've always wanted for Africa, especially Pan-Africanism. But I also have questions with that. So my next question is, how does Russia support Ibrahim Traoré? And it says Russia has become a key strategic ally to Burkina Faso's interim president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, providing multifaceted support since he assumed power in a 2022 coup. This alliance encompasses military assistance, economic collaboration, and political backing. Military assistance, economic collaboration, and political backing. Isn't that what France and the West was providing? Isn't that the support they were getting from France and other Western countries? And so isn't he just replacing one white man with another? How is this representative of the African freedom and African independence that we've been fighting for, or that Pan-Africanism promises? Why is being under Russia's control a better look for Western African states? Why is that a better look? Does Russia not behave in colonial ways? And what is it that France does? What are the demands being placed on them by France and the EU and even America, what are the demands being placed on those Western states, on Burkina Faso, that Russia is not placing on them? And I think those are good questions to ask. So the first thing is military support. Following the expulsion of French troops in early 2023, Burkina Faso turned to Russia for military cooperation. President Traoré has publicly acknowledged Russia as a major supplier of military equipment, though he denies the presence of Russian mercenaries such as the Wagner Group in the country. So the Wagner Group are Russian mercenaries. Wow, interesting. In a response to a recent coup attempt, reports indicate that Russia deployed special forces to Burkina Faso to bolster Traoré's security. So Russia has deep interest in Burkina Faso, deep interest in West Africa. I think Russia sees Africa as, a central part of their dominance, if you will. And why is that not seen as colonial? Why is it that Russia and China's want for control or need for control in West Africa, why isn't that seen as colonial? Again, maybe once we get into exactly what their demands are, we'll get the answer to that. But let's continue. The next is economic collaboration. Burkina Faso has also deepened economic ties with Russia. In April 2025, the government granted an industrial mining license to the Russian company Nordgold for a new gold project, projected to contribute significantly to the state budget. So what's the difference here? What's the difference between France controlling the mining in Burkina Faso or Russia controlling it? Isn't that still the quote-unquote white man taking the resources of Africa? How is this any different? I mean, you're still mining. Is there not still children working in the mines to get gold to send? Instead of sending it to France, now it's being sent to Russia. And so how does this help the people of France? Of Burkina Faso. Are they still not being robbed of their resources by the white man? Let's continue. The next thing is political alignment. Politically, Burkina Faso has aligned itself with Russia and neighboring military-led governments in Mali and Niger. The three countries formed the Alliance of Sahel States in 2023, a security partnership that has distanced them from Western allies. This strategic alliance with Russia has bolstered Traoré's position domestically and internationally, providing him with the military support, economic partnerships, and political solidarity amid regional instability. So again, I'm still struggling to see what the difference between Russian control and Western control is. Why is one better than the other? Why is control by the white man better than why is control by the French white man worse than control by the Russian white man? Let's see. The next question is, how does Russia benefit from the partnership with Traoré? Russia benefits from its partnership with Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso in several strategic and economic ways. 1. Access to natural resources. Gold and minerals. Burkina Faso is rich in gold, and Russia, through companies like Nordgold, has secured mining concessions. This strengthens Russia's foothold in Africa's natural resources and boosts its economy, especially in the face of Western sanctions. So it's either one white man controlling your gold or another white man. How is what Traoré is doing different from what any other African leaders have done? They ask for protection in exchange for gold. And that looks and sounds exactly like what is still happening. So why are we being asked to support this this type of influence from the white man. It's still the white man in Africa um, taking advantage of or taking the resources away from Africa. Why is that more noble? Um, Long-term economic states. Partnerships with resource-rich but unstable countries offer Russia valuable raw materials outside of Western-influenced markets. So Russia has its own economic interests. Russia isn't doing this because Russia feels that Burkina Faso needs to get away from neo-colonial states. Russia is doing it for its own colonial reasons, to get control of those resources itself. What other reason do those French states have of going into West Africa other than to control the gold? What other more important reason is there? And again, why is Russia not seen as colonial when they're pretty much doing the same thing? The next thing is geopolitical influence in West Africa. By aligning with Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, Russia positions itself as a dominant player in the Sahel, reducing Western, especially French and US influence in the region. This aligns with Russia's broader strategy to expand its global influence through military cooperation and anti-Western alliances. And again, why isn't that neocolonialism? Is that not colonialism? It says this aligns with Russia's broader strategy to expand its global influence through military cooperation and They're doing the same thing. They're trying to broaden their global influence. Is that not neocolonialism? And why are we being asked to support one colonialist over another in favor of an authoritarian military leader? Why is that in our interest? Why is that in Africa's interest? Military and diplomatic leverage. Deploying military advisors or support, even if informally through groups like Wagner, gives Russia leverage over the internal security of the country. They have leverage over the internal security of the country. It also helps Russia portray itself as a protector of sovereignty against neo-colonial Western powers, strengthening its soft power narrative across Africa. So it sounds like Russia is just really playing them, if you will. Russia is playing on their fears of colonialism. Russia is playing on their experience with colonialist states. And Russia is telling them that they're helping them fight colonialism while being colonialists themselves. But I think it's plain as day that Russia was really fundamentally what they're interested in is the same thing that Western states are interested in as well. Alliance formation. The formation of the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, offers Russia a bloc of like-minded, military-led governments that are open to Russian arms, training, and political partnership. It offers Russia a bloc of like-minded, military-led governments. Like-minded. How are they like-minded as Russia? Is it just that they are anti-Western, anti-the West? Or is it because they have communist tendencies like Russia does? So how are they like-minded? We know that Putin has been in power in Russia forever. And so does Traore plan on being in power in Burkina Faso forever? Do these military leaders ever plan on giving up power? I'm not so sure they do. It says these alliances can be used as voting blocs or diplomatic allies in international forums like the UN. So Russia is really only interested in its own interests. Russia is interested in what's in it for Russia, and Russia sees global influence as being in their favor, and Russia is in it for Russia. So why are we being asked in the West to support a Russian-led insurgency or a Russian-led coup of a democratically elected government? Why should we, and why are we supporting that in the name of Pan-Africanism when they themselves are going against Pan-Africanist states? Like, I'm still at a loss as to why we're being asked to support this wholeheartedly. The next question I asked is, why are Sahel states like-minded with Russia? And it says the Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are increasingly aligned with Russia due to shared geopolitical interests and opposition to Western influence. Here's why they are considered like-minded with Russia. Anti-Western sentiment. All three countries expelled French military forces and criticized Western involvement as neo-colonial or ineffective against terrorism. Russia presents itself as a non-interventionist partner that supports sovereignty without demanding political reforms or human rights conditions. Okay, so there we are. That's the difference. That's the difference. Russia presents itself as a non-interventionist partner that supports sovereignty without demanding political reforms or human rights conditions. They're non-interventionists. They don't interfere with what's going on in the country. They say the West, sometimes the West goes in there and want to push their LGBTQ agenda. Whatever agenda the West thinks is important for the West, they push in African states. And I guess Russia just doesn't necessarily care about those things and doesn't interfere with them. Russia just gets its gold and y'all get to do whatever y'all want to do. We won't interfere with you. They don't demand political reforms, not even a reform of telling them to go back to civilian rule. If you want your military leader, Russia is like, have your military leader. That's your business. Russia does not try to tell you what to do, not even with human rights. In terms of human rights conditions, Russia doesn't have to, adhere to human rights legislature. And, you do whatever you want to do. Russia just has a hands-off approach when it comes to the West, to West Africa. They do not have the concerns of democracy. They are not concerned with democratic rule. Russia just wants your gold. Russia just wants your gold. You do whatever you want. You get to be a sovereign state that decides however you want to decide. And, and that's it. We'll support you and we'll get our influence. And so is that what people in the West, black people in the West, is that really what we should be supporting? Right? Where there's no human rights, and human rights violations are we just turn our backs on it. All in the name of we are against neocolonialism, right? And the issues that these colonialists are having with you are your violations of human rights. I don't know if that's something that I would support. Are there issues of human rights violations in Burkina Faso? Well, we'll kind of look into that as well. But let's just finish this section. So again, that's important. That's what separates Russia from the Western states. They have a hands-off approach. Y'all do whatever you want to do with your politics, with your coups, with your violations of human rights. We are not concerned with any of that. Y'all do you. Just give us what y'all got to give us. Just give us our resources and we're good. The next thing is military rule and strategic independence. Each of these countries is under military-led transitional governments after coups. They seek to consolidate power without pressure from Western institutions like the UN, ECOWAS, or the EU. So they just want to have their military governments, and they want to consolidate their military power without any type of pressure. All right, we don't tell us to have elections. We ain't really for that. Russia provides military support, arms, and training without conditions, which appeals to these regimes. That's the difference. That's the difference, and that's what we're being asked to support. Security and counterterrorism. Facing Islamist insurgencies, these states have turned to Russia for military equipment and potential Wagner Group deployments, especially after distancing from French-led counterterrorism missions like Operation Barkhane. So I guess they expect better support from Russia when it comes to fighting terrorism. Ideological alignment. Russia frames its Africa policy as anti-imperialist, positioning itself as an ally of African nations reclaiming autonomy. This narrative resonates with the Sahel leaders' rhetoric. Russia frames its Africa policy as anti-imperialist. Russia is smart. What can I say? Russia is smart. If all African states talk about is colonialism and imperialism even today, then why wouldn't Russia play on that? And I think that's what we're seeing happening. Economic and political support. Russia offers alternative trade, mining deals, and diplomatic backing in international forums, which helps these governments resist Western sanctions and diplomatic isolation. In short, the Sahel states and Russia find common ground in sovereignty, security cooperation, and mutual rejection of Western dominance. Yeah, that's just really interesting, and it makes sense. Russia is only concerned with the resources that they get out of Africa. They don't interfere with what you want to do. Do whatever you like, and we'll protect you as long as you give us, you pay us for that protection. That's pretty much Russia's position. But I do want to, last thing I want to look into is just how much the human rights violations in Burkina Faso and those other Sahel states. So that's the next thing I want to look into. So the question I asked is, what human rights violations occur in Sahel states, particularly Burkina Faso? And it says, in the Sahel states, particularly Burkina Faso, numerous human rights violations have been reported, committed by both state forces and armed groups. These abuses are tied to the ongoing conflict with jihadist insurgents and political instability. 1. Extrajudicial killings by security forces. Burkina Faso's military and pro-government militias, example VDPs, Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, have been accused of executing civilians suspected of supporting jihadists. A major example is the April 2023 massacre in Karma village, where over 150 civilians were reportedly killed by Burkinabe soldiers in retaliation for an attack on the army. 2. Arbitrary detention and torture. Security forces have detained individuals without due process, especially in conflict zones. Reports include beatings, torture, and inhumane treatment of detainees accused of terrorism. 3. Forced disappearances. Civilians suspected of jihadist ties have reportedly disappeared after military operations. These cases often go uninvestigated due to the breakdown of judicial oversight in rural areas. And how much of this human rights violations, how much of these are just blamed on people being jihadist, having jihadist ties? They want to do something to someone, all they gotta say is he's a jihadist. Is that something, or are these legitimate jihadists that are that are being rounded up, if you will, for attacks on civilians by jihadists. Islamist groups target villages, schools, religious centers, and aid workers. Tactics include mass killings, abductions, forced recruitment of children, and sexual violence. And maybe that's why the people of Burkina Faso are okay with this type of human rights violations against jihadists, because they're having major problems with jihadists who are conducting mass murders against them and abductions. So can you really blame them for not caring about the human rights of jihadists? Displacement and humanitarian crisis. Over 2 million people are displaced in Burkina Faso alone due to violence and insecurity. Attacks on aid convoys and blockades in northern areas have created food shortages and restricted access to medical care. And how much of that is due to these jihadists that Traore and the military are fighting against, which seems to be the major charge against them for human rights violations. Restrictions on press and civil liberties. The military government has restricted media, shut down news outlets, and expelled international journalists. That wouldn't be because of jihadists, would it? You wouldn't restrict media and shut down news outlets because they're jihadists? Is that why that is going on? Is that human rights violations to not have people to not have freedom of the press? Sounds like it to me. And protests are often banned or violently suppressed. So they ban protests. They ban protests in Burkina Faso, but they want us to protest for Burkina Faso. How does that work? How are people in America, black people in America, and black people in Europe, and black people in the Caribbean, how are we being asked to protest in favor of the Burkina Faso government, the Burkina Faso military government, when the Burkina Faso military government bans protest in Burkina Faso? That doesn't make any sense to me. You won't catch me doing that. That's nuts. You want me to protest in favor of Burkina Faso's government, but I can't protest in Burkina Faso? That's madness. That's madness. So apparently the human rights violations extend beyond their fight against jihadists. Apparently, if you have a military government, there are going to be human rights violations, because you're gonna in order to stay in power, a military government is gonna have to suppress the rights of the people. You're going to have to. People's rights are gonna be violated under any military authoritarian government. It's only natural. So in summary, Burkina Faso faces widespread and systemic human rights violations, both from state forces and jihadist groups. And where's the separation? How do we know which is which? These abuses are fueled by counterinsurgency measures, weak rule of law, and escalating conflict. So again, I'm not in support of protesting for Burkina Faso. Not until they show that they want to go back to civilian rule and that they are really interested in being an independent African nation. But right now, it doesn't appear like that to me. It doesn't appear like that at all. You cannot be an independent African nation under military control. Pan-Africanism cannot be based on military control. If the Pan-African umbrella and the Pan-African state that you envision is led by military rule, then I'm not going to support that. I'm definitely not a Pan-African. I'm not that type of Pan-African. I don't know if I'm any type of a Pan-African. But if that's what Pan-Africanism means, I'm definitely not. The last thing I'm really interested in is what is the U.S. government's position in what's going on? I know I had seen videos about Trump inviting Traore to the White House and he rejected. I don't know how much truth there is to that. But I know that America also gets brought up in terms of being a part of the Western neo-colonial powers that want to control Burkina Faso. So the last thing I'm interested in is what is Trump's Africa policy, and what has been the American government's view on what's going on in Burkina Faso. And what the only thing ChatGPT says is that Trump generally reduced U.S. engagement in Africa and emphasized counterterrorism, not nation building or democracy promotion. So how is that? Isn't that the same hands-off approach that Russia is taking? Isn't that the same where Trump's only issue is helping you with counterterrorism, but he's not interested in nation building? So he's not interested in putting in any puppet governments. He's not interested in being a part of your politics. And he's also not interested in promoting democracy. So it sounds as if his major issue is counterterrorism and fighting against the terrorism that's in those states. And I would assume that if he is interested in helping you with your counterterrorism, then of course he's going to also be interested in getting some of your resources. That's also his position with the Ukraine. His position with the Ukraine is, sure, we'll help you fight against Russia, but you got to give us some of those natural resources of yours. And that's the deal that was just made. So his position with a European country like Ukraine is not any different from his position with these West African nations. And so I don't see why that's some colonialist position that's any different from how he's treating non-black countries. It just doesn't seem much different to me. And so that's pretty much what the US's position has been. Do I think it's also, if you're gonna fight counterterrorism, then you would also have to be involved in your human rights as well. And so human rights, demands of human rights and counterterrorism, I think are good reasons to be in Burkina, in West Africa. If you want us to come in there to help you fight these terrorists, if your government wants us to help you with your terrorism problem, okay, we'll help you. But for one, you're going to pay us. And for two, you have to yourself stop these human rights violations that the government is engaged in. We're not going to fight these terrorist violations and ignore your own human rights violations against your own people. I think that would be an irresponsible position for America to take. And it sounds like an irresponsible position that Russia is taking, where they'll help you with counterterrorism, but hold a blind eye to the government's human rights violations. It just does not make any sense to me. So, ultimately, should Black people outside of Africa, Black people in the diaspora, should we be supporting these protests in support of a military leader who came to power through a coup that ousted a democratically elected leader who shows no intentions on going back to civilian rule, who himself has issues with human rights violations, who is turning now to communist countries for support. Like, should we in the West be in support of that? And why should we be in support of that? Simply because Traoré claims to be a Pan-Africanist? So do the people that are opposed to him. The ECOWAS states themselves are Pan-Africanist states. So what brand of Pan-Africanism are we being asked to support? What brand of Pan-Africanism are we supporting? Pan-Africanism under a democratic banner, or Pan-Africanism under a military rule banner? I know which Pan-Africanism I would support. I'm not a Pan-Africanist, but I support democracy and civilian rule. So, again, I am very skeptical of this push on social media to have Black people support Traoré simply because he's a young, good-looking military guy in military gear with a face mask and a gun on his waist. Just simply for those reasons, that's why because he represents the fight against colonialism. And I won't let that, interfere with my thought patterns on what I think is best for myself as someone who lives in the West. And even for Africa in general. I don't think that those types of governments are best for any state. And so, I'm going to reserve my support for Traoré on those grounds. When he shows that he wants to go back to civilian rule, and he shows that, he's trying to reduce the human rights violations in his country, then, I may change my view. But until then, I'm just going to hold back my support. And, that's pretty much all I have to say about that at this point. The routine. Please leave a comment. If you think there's something I'm overlooking, something I haven't considered, leave a comment. I read all my comments. I appreciate comments, so please leave a comment, like the video, subscribe, and you're done, Noah. We'll catch you on the next one. Blessings.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them up to one hygiene a tweet. That's why enough of them, rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 days, we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep an eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go rape. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle with some meat. The system will slide where you fit.
In the streets so we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest, say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. Everybody just a pre-success. When me looking at the street, you me see enough stress. Them all a fight for who reach up next. Everybody want floss and a beat up chest. Juvenile in a them teen love sex. Them a breed the fast money, them no need subjects. And if you're unfortunate, please don't vex. I saw the thing said cause the streets don't
rest. In the streets so we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest, say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah. It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. But bad mind them out to one, hygiene a do it. That's why enough of them, yeah, rifle a beat. Everybody want the guns and want to drive in a jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 wheels, you can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go leap. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we sonate. The system will slide where you fit.
In the streets where we born and grow, only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life.
Everybody a priest and them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life. This a real ghetto life. Yeah.